Hey everyone, I'm Jack Wannon of Knockdown News. I want to welcome you into a bit of a new thing we're going to be doing at the site. In January, I launched the JMMA Monday column, and it was a way to discuss Japanese MMA and some of the bigger topics surrounding the scene every week. And that's going to stick around, but we're also going to branch out too. As a bit of a complimentary piece, we're going to be trying to do this new thing, the JMMA Monday audio podcast. It's going to be coming out around the same time as the column every week, but it's going to be a casual forum to discuss the topics surrounding the scene every single week. We're going to have guests, we're going to have interviews, and overall, it's going to be a good time. We are very fortunate to have Charlie Jewett as our first guest on the podcast. Charlie, also known as CJ, is the owner and head writer for Japanese MMA website sogo-kaku.com. He is frequently writing insight on the scene and is often doing on-site interviews and event coverage. Along with his work on the site, he co-hosts the Let's Talk JMMA podcast with Shu Hirata and is a co-host of the High Kicks and Arm Bars show with Babalu Jack. Charlie, thank you for coming on the pod this week.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here. I love all the content you produce, especially the articles on Mondays.
I appreciate that. Listen, we have a lot to discuss, especially, going into this next RIZIN event. It's one that's really interesting to me. When I thought about the Atomweight Grand Prix, the Super Atomweight Grand Prix that's coming up, I've argued this before that it just feels like this is the time to do it. Compared to last year, compared to 2 years ago, this is the absolute perfect time because you just have all these different storylines going into it. New champion, we have Reina returning to the division. We have Ayaka Hamasaki for the first time in a long time chasing something instead of being the person who is chased. And we also have Mikuru Asakura trying to almost restart this greatness that she created once in a Grand Prix all the way back in 2017. I want to ask you, going into this tournament, what do you think is like the most intriguing storyline out of those like big four that you can look at?
Oh, that's a good question. So what's interesting is amongst the Japanese fighters especially, there's just a bunch of story existing already between the fighters. And so there's a lot of backstory. I can already imagine what the marketing materials and the RIZIN confession videos are going to look like. But off the top of my head, the Reina fight, Reina keeps saying that she thinks she's the one to beat Seika Izawa. And so that's kind of an interesting idea. But in the opening round, the biggest story to me is the Ayaka Hamasaki versus Jessica Aguilar fight, just because of the history behind it. I mean, Jessica Aguilar fought Megumi Fuji in Megumi Fuji's retirement bout. She was part of a very important tournament almost like 10 years ago in Bellator. So it's kind of nice to see her start her career in a giant tournament and then ending her career in the same kind of tournament. And she was actually supposed to fight Ayaka back in, I think, 2011, no, 2010 or 11. It would have been 11. Yeah, but 2011 when the earthquake hit. So there's so much backstory for this fight. I'm very interested in it.
And it's interesting. I remember when you posted that trivia, that poster of the first time they were expected to fight, it was on a Jules card. Yes. And it's just interesting to me because I think about how long ago that was. And these are practically not even the same fighters anymore. These are two completely different people. They've been through so much since then. So it's an interesting storyline to tell in the sense that you're seeing this fight finally, but you're also just seeing a different fight compared to what you would have had back in 2011.
It was interesting because back then it'd probably be arguable that that's when Jessica Aguilar was in her prime. I think she was doing very well in Bellator. She had yet to go over to World Series of Fighting and win the championship over there. And Ayaka was really just getting started out. It was going to be like one of the, I don't know off the top of my head, but it might have been the first foreign fighter she was going to face. If not, I mean, outside of Ham Sohei, but outside of that, it was a nice test in her ability at the beginning of her career. And it's kind of interesting now she's fighting her near the end of her career instead.
Yeah, that match is definitely like when you talk about matchups in this first round, that's the one that I'm most interested in. There's a lot of questions going into this. Like Reina's opponent, we obviously don't know too much about, two pro fights.
Right.
Seika Izawa's opponent, I don't know much about. Really, I don't know anything about Laura Fontoura, but there's something really interesting about seeing a 7-0 record. So obviously that's going to be intriguing too.
Well, yeah, Reina's opponent, Anastasia, I hear from various reports, had a pretty good amateur record as well. So the 2-0 might be a little bit deceiving, but it sounds like she's a striker. So that could be a fun bout between two strikers. And I like the Seika Izawa matchup because up till now, she's faced predominantly judo-based fighters.
Mm.
So it'll be interesting to see her go against the Brazilian jiu-jitsu style fighter and see how she does against that.
Yeah, and for this Reina fight, I mean, I could be off base here, but the way I see it is, even though she has an opponent that might have a 2-0 record and people might look past that, I think that just plays into the fact that a big storyline going into this fight will be Reina making the 108 limit again. I mean, we have not seen Reina make 108 pounds since 2018 when she had a scare and was hospitalized during a weight cut. What do you think about this move? I mean, personally, I was surprised that she was in this tournament because after fighting around 110, 112 for a few years, I was just under the assumption that that's how she's going to ride out the rest of her career. So what did you think about her being in this super atomweight tournament?
She's the bit of the Japanese competitors. She's the biggest surprise to me just because of the weight thing, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it's worth noting that she made the weight limit, I think 7 times before she had the hospital issue. And I think that was a combination of medical issues that caused her to have a problem making the weight. And originally, she wasn't interested in this tournament because the tournament was originally going to be an all Japanese tournament. And she wasn't interested in that. But when they switched it to bringing in foreign competitors because the borders opened up, that's when she decided to enter it. So I think if you listen to her interviews, she kind of wants to go back to Bellator and win in Bellator. And I think she sees this as a good opportunity to get back into Bellator. And I think that's why she's going to make the weight. Plus, ever since she started switching her training up between AACC and Brave, it looks like she's kind of revitalized her interest in the sport. And she's no longer talking about retiring. So I think she's kind of got a fire lit in her to compete again. And she realizes that this is the division she has to compete in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is the division that people joked as Reina weight, and she almost created her own Reina weight by becoming like a 110-pound fighter past couple of years. But I find it interesting that she's in this tournament. I also find it interesting that she didn't want to be in a tournament unless there was international fighters, because realistically, I personally think that domestically the division's in a really great spot right now, and if the borders were closed, they still would have been able to do a tournament with 8 women.
Well, I don't think that's the issue. I think her issue was in that same comment. She trains at AACC, which is like a women's powerhouse historically in Japan.
Yeah, yeah.
Megumi Fuji trained there, Ayaka Hamasaki, Saori Oshima, Miki Matono all trained there. And she said that if it was a domestic tournament, there would have been too many fighters from AACC in the tournament. And she wasn't interested. She said she's willing to fight Ayaka Hamasaki, but only if it's in the finals. And so I think she doesn't want to fight her training partners unless she has to.
Mm-hmm. So, looking ahead here, what do you think about this tournament if you were to, sort of imagine how it plays out? Obviously, we don't know how the later rounds are going to go when it comes to matchups and how that will affect the finals. But if you were just to say, who do you think is going to be your pick for this? Who would it be?
Well, my first comment is based off going off my last comment. I don't think there's going to be like a bracket style thing based off of Rena's comment that she's only going to fight Ayaka Hamasaki if they go to the finals.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think that each round they'll kind of do matchmaking.
Right.
But
and not to cut you off, but they are changing things around with this tournament in the sense that, for one, they aren't doing the semis and the finals in the same night. So some things about this tournament are different from the bantamweight one we saw last year.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe that might be because of all the injuries that happened in last year's tournament. They're trying to avoid that. I don't know. But in the opening, it's hard to predict the later rounds just because I don't know what the matchups would be. But I think the Japanese fighters are well favored. I don't know enough about Seika Izawa's opponent, to be honest. But I think the big upset or the big surprise to a lot of the Japanese fans is I kind of think Siwoo Park has a really good chance of beating Kana Asakura. They trained together previously when Kana was training for her fight with Satomi Takano. She trained with Siwoo Park, and Siwoo Park is a very physical, very athletic, and a striker. And she has fought people like Seika Izawa before, and it was a very close fight. And Seika Izawa had a really hard time taking Siwoo Park down. She had a hard time keeping her down when she did. And then she fought Hikaru Aono, who was also a very high-level wrestler who wasn't able to get Siwoo Park down. And I say all this because Kana Asakura has a wrestling base, but I don't think her wrestling is anywhere near the level of Seika Izawa or Hikaru Aono. And if they had a hard time getting Siwoo Park down, I think Kana is going to have a really hard time getting her down.
Mm. Yeah,
and it's worth noting, Siwoo, because the borders are open back up, Siwoo Park is back training in Korea with Ham Sohee for this fight.
That's true, yeah, because she was stuck in Japan for a very long amount of the pandemic. Is that right?
Yeah, so Deep was very smart. So Deep realized the borders were going to close down. So what they did was they got some of their international prospects and they moved them, like Siwoo Park, and they moved them to Japan and got them visas before the borders shut down. So Siwoo Park's been able to compete these past 2 years in Japan because she was essentially living here.
Mm-hmm. But I guess the bad part about that is you can't really leave the country either.
Right. Well, now she's taking advantage of that because she was training at Crazy B, but Crazy B has kind of gone through some problems, and Team Mad in South Korea is such a powerhouse gym. I mean, they create so much talent. So now that she's back there, I just think she's going to get even better. And not to say that Crazy B is bad. I think training with Miyamoto for 2 years has greatly improved her takedown defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and honestly, I think that she's someone in this tournament who's being very much overlooked. I think just based off how they're marketing this tournament, they are giving you these 4 names that are these like 4 top people in the bracket, and then there's the people they're facing in the opening round. And unfortunately, I think Park falls on the other side of that description, even though she is certainly someone who can play upset here.
My thing with the tournament is it's very clearly being marketed to the Japanese audience as the 4 Japanese fighters. Mm-hmm. The foreigners are just that. They're just foreigners being brought in to fight the 4 Japanese stars. But the important thing is I think this tournament is RIZIN's attempt to crown Seika Izawa as the champion.
Yeah.
Because Rena, Kana, and Ayaka may all be different ages, but I think they're all at very similar places of their career and that they're all thinking of retirement. Kana is young, but she said in the past she wants to retire around 25, 26. She said in the press conference for that this year she hopes to get engaged. So I think she's ready to start a family, and I think she's ready to call it up. At this tournament would be the perfect crowning achievement, because in the past when I interviewed her, she said if she became the champion again, she would retire. Mm-hmm. So I think if she wins this tournament again, I think she'll retire off of that win.
Yeah, and I feel like if this tournament does go that way for Izawa, this is really a solidifying thing for her, because realistically, even though she had 2 great performances against Hamasaki and those were huge wins, this is still a 6-0 fighter, and I think that causes a lot of people to write her off. And you know, it's hard for a lot of people to consider her this big name in the division when she's still quite early in her career. So this tournament gives her 3 opportunities to beat people and still keep that champion status. And if she comes out on top, she is quite a big name in the division.
Well, just look at the previous tournament in 2017. Kana Asakura was essentially a nobody to the mainstream Japanese MMA fans. But when she won that tournament, she became a superstar in RIZIN. She's one of the most popular fighters in the promotion.
Well, it's funny. It's almost like it's almost like she's still riding that high now, you know?
Well, she became quite a popular YouTuber, which I think helped boost her popularity. And it's kind of weird to say, but her dating Tenshin also jacked up her popularity. Even if you look up Google Trends today, one of the most closely associated search terms with her name is Tenshin. So there's that history. But this tournament has potential. So Seika Izawa called for this tournament when she won the title. She asked for it to help prove herself. And I think that's exactly what RIZIN's doing. They're giving her the opportunity to become the new face of the division. Because let's be honest, all the other fighters in RIZIN's division are close to retiring or in their 40s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, honestly, that tournament, it's one of the more interesting things coming out of this event. Before this tournament was announced, I was saying that RIZIN 37 desperately needs something that you can market as the main thing. Didn't really have that before, and now it really has that. So actually, you know, I want to ask you, do you think, what do you rate this card overall now that it has that bracket and everything else piled on top of it? Would you say this is like a Saitama worthy lineup?
Well, it's kind of funny you say that, because before this was announced, I was kind of iffy because there was some big fighters on the event, but they weren't necessarily fights that I was interested in.
Right.
And they seemed like really good fights for the beginning of a main event or like the middle card. But now that this has been added, and then there's been some additional announcements, like I believe, who was recently announced?
Koji Takeda is facing
Case.
Johnny Case
Yes,
now.
exactly. Yeah. Now that was added, I mean, Johnny Case being back is huge. He's quite popular in Japan. But this tournament really pushes it up for me. And beforehand, it was going to be kind of a mediocre rising card. But now I think it's definitely a Saitama-worthy event, especially with the tournament, because it has year-long implications. The winners of these matches will be advancing in the tournament. And when you put the tournament edge to it, it kind of adds to the importance of the event.
Right. And I think that, you know, just in the schedule, RIZIN needed that marquee summer event. You know, we had a lot of stuff to start the year, and it felt like for a while they just sort of hit the brakes. Even with this recent RIZIN 36 card, they sort of hit the brakes for a while, and it didn't feel like there was much going on with the promotion at all besides the match. But you can't really even relate that as a RIZIN thing more than it was just like a big kickboxing thing.
I think there's two issues. I think one, with the bantamweight tournament last year, I think there was like serious fatigue. I think that, I mean, half the fighters in that broke their hands, everyone got injured, and all those stars weren't able to fight for the first half of the year because they're recovering from the tournament. And then you had the match, which led to this weird kind of like delay where no other combat sport wanted to compete near it because they knew they wouldn't be able to get any media attention. And then there was also the negative press attention, which I think also kind of scrambled some things. But this, to me at least, is the best card of the year so far.
Really? You would say it's better than that 3 title fight show that we had earlier? I thought that was a really strong show.
I forgot about that. That was a very good show, but looking forward to the future, you're right. That was probably a better card, but this has
on paper at least
to be a very good card. Yeah, this has potential to be a good card. And the implications of it are huge because if all 4 Japanese fighters win, it leads to some very potential interesting rematches. It leads to interesting storylines. But if some of the foreigners win, I mean, it leads to other crazy opportunities as well. It could build them.
Leads to star making. Yeah.
You win this tournament, you're a superstar.
We could get the next Kana Asakura.
Exactly. I mean, some of the girls, I mean, even the other, like Alyssa Garcia, I thought was a great fighter. And she's coming back recently, I think. I mean, they've had great foreigners fighting the promotion. Some of them, it's like, well, Maria from the last tournament's in the UFC now, isn't she?
Yes, yeah. Oliveira.
Yes, I mean, they've had some great fighters in this tournament that I think Shingo and the people who are rising do a great job of scouting out young talent. And even if some of these foreign fighters don't have the exposure or the experience, I think that they'll perform quite well.
Yeah, and
I'm excited for it.
I think that, you know, you mentioned the scouting that RIZIN does. I think that one thing that makes the scouting that RIZIN does look so good is not how the fighters look when they're brought into RIZIN, but how they look past that career. You know, there's so many people who were in RIZIN who are now these huge names in the sport just overall.
We have we have a UFC champion and a Bellator champion. Yeah,
exactly. So it's a very big time for, you know, RIZIN alum in the MMA world. Now, I want to talk about quickly about Deep 108. You were at this show. There was some.
Yes.
There was a few takeaways from it that I wanted to ask you about. For one, Juri Ohara had another win in the main event. This was the main event, right?
It was, yes.
Yeah, I was interested because this wasn't like the biggest matchup for him. It was kind of like a squash match possibly, but it was just another really strong showing from him. So it's hard to ignore that.
Absolute savage. I mean, he looked amazing. One thing about Ohara that he has killer instinct. The second he hurts a fighter, he does not give them a chance to recover. He hit the guy with a overhand right, I believe, and dropped him. And before the guy was 100% on the mat, he nailed him with a soccer kick to finish the fight. So once he hurts a guy, it's over. He doesn't hesitate. He goes straight for the finish.
Yeah, and, you know, I mentioned something on Twitter recently that the run he's on right now sort of deserves more attention because he's put together quite a long winning streak between RIZIN and deep appearances. And I would
Yes,
say that he's one of the best in the division right now.
he's come quite a ways because I always had the impression that Rising kind of brought him in to lose to Yachi.
Right.
And that fight ended up being a crazy fight. And I think that he deserves to come back. But I also think Deep has been using him to main event a bunch of their events. So I think he's kind of being built up into a star in Deep. And he looks like he has quite a few fans. He's very close, it seems, with the Marion family, that t-shirt company that sponsors everybody. So there's always a bunch of people wearing his shirts in the crowd. But I'd love to see him back in Rising. And I mean, there's no one else really with that type of streak in the division outside of Souza.
Yeah, and one thing that's so interesting about it to me is that he's on this streak and it's just come at such a weird time in his career. I mean,
Right.
he's so deep into his career. He has 30 wins now, 17 losses. And it's almost like a Charles Oliveira thing that you're seeing with this championship run in the UFC where, he's been around and everybody's known him for a long time, but all of a sudden he's just broken into this really impressive streak of victories.
It's kind of funny because it's like a very Japanese MMA thing where, I mean, they have amateur divisions, but a lot of the times it's like, oh, I started fighting 2 weeks after training. So you'll meet these fighters that have like crazy records because they fought all this time when they shouldn't really have been taking fights. But yeah, his I mean, I was I was looking at some older events and saw his name on them. I was kind of surprised. He's been around for so long, but he's really turned it on recently. I think he's using his height well. He's a very tall fighter, and I think he's figured out how to use that, and he's got great power in his punches.
Well, it certainly wouldn't surprise me if he gets a title fight sometime because in RIZIN, because for one, I don't think there's many options at lightweight.
Right.
And also, it's just such a marketable thing that you have this guy in Japan who is on such a roll. Why wouldn't you put him against your champion?
I would agree. I would think he had a better chance of getting a title shot during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd be surprised. Rising might bring in some international fighters for Souza to face.
Yeah, because the
build
global
him into a superstar.
The global lightweight market is just take your pick, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they can go find some ex-UFC guys or Bellator guys and bring them over.
I wanted to know, is there any other big takeaways from this card that you would mention?
My favorite fight of the event, Daisuke Nakamura, looked awesome. Daisuke Nakamura, it was like a throwback to a Sakuraba fight. He fought Yuta and Locke, he has like a weird rename, who was undefeated. And I think he must have gone for at least 10 or 15 arm bars. It was crazy. It's crazy to me that at his age, he took so much time off and then came back to MMA and is doing so well. I mean, I think in 2021, he knocked out Ushiku. So in his 40s, Nakamura's having quite the run.
Yeah, and he especially, like, one of the things that's so interesting about his current run is just his activity. He's fighting numerous times every year and producing good results, and it's so surprising to see that from someone who's 42.
Yeah, it's like the opposite because Pancrase has Yuki Kondo, who shouldn't be fighting. But Daisuke Nakamura, I mean, he's still able to be in there. He knocked out the RIZIN champion a year ago. He's doing great. And I think Deep puts him in matchups that are fun and exciting. Also worthy of note, this event had 8 RIZIN veterans on it. So it's just absolutely stacked with talent. Shuto Watanabe got a win. I'm hoping to see him back in RIZIN soon. So then on an interesting sub note, Seika Izawa's younger brother won. So,
yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. And there was some heavyweight action. It was a very, very strange fight. The Akazawa was this heavyweight who's trained by Yushino Kami and Akiyama. And he fought this guy whose ring name was Andy Kong, who was just doing like his best Diaz impression and taunting and insulting and mocking. He laid on the mat. He showed his butt, all this stuff. And then Akazawa just took him down and absolutely brutally knocked him out. He had to be carried out of the cage. So it was kind of a weird fight to watch.
The circumstances of that fight were really interesting to me. That correct me if I'm wrong, Andy Kong was a short-nosed replacement for Ryo Sakai.
Yes, exactly.
And this was also his pro debut.
Yes, and I think he was he must be part Russian or something, because he's really playing up the Russian side in the VTR, and he came out to a Russian song. But it was like a comedy bit in the beginning, but he got brutally knocked out.
Right. To me, it's just like when you have this scene which doesn't have much of a heavyweight division, and you find someone who can take a short notice heavyweight fight, you're almost asking for trouble. Like, nothing good's going to come out of that.
I mean, heavyweight division is essentially really old Japanese guys and people they find on military bases who are free that weekend.
And ex-sumo wrestlers.
Exactly. Sudario was at the event, and he looks in great shape.
Right, and we'll be seeing him soon, right?
Yeah, I think he's fighting at the RIZIN 37.
Well, I will say he has he has stuck around much longer than I expected, and that is
his physical gifts are undeniable. He's in much better shape than his brother.
Mm-hmm. I'm just always skeptical about throwing someone into the fire. Like, okay, you've never fought before, you're a RIZIN fighter now. I just feel like the increase in competition gets too hard too quick for someone to stay afloat. But that's just like a side note.
Well, that's the problem, especially when you have them fighting pro wrestlers, and then all of a sudden it's like, now we're giving you real MMA fighters.
Yeah, now we're giving you a guy who's fought for us like 4 times.
Exactly.
Now, quickly, I want to talk about this breaking down show that Mikuru Asakura is doing. I'm a little confused about what this show is, but one thing that stuck out to me is that clearly a lot of people are watching it. There's numerous videos on YouTube. All of them seem like press conferences where people are just like getting into scuffles. They all seem like the same video, but they all have like 5 million views each. So I'm really interested what this is.
Yeah, so I think an important detail to understanding breaking down is to understand that Mikuru and Kai both come from an organization called Outsiders.
Right.
Which was essentially like street fights that Akira Maeda put together. And so under breaking down, the fights are only a minute long. And so I think it's like perfect for today's like YouTube culture of just all you have to commit to is a 1 minute long fight, very short attention span savvy. But the event is actually today. So it's Sunday, the 17th, the day we're doing this. And it's going to be on pay-per-view. It's like 2,800 yen. And you can either get it on his website or the Abima website. Interesting. He's got some big sponsors. It's sponsored by the F1 racing team, and it's sponsored by a giant book company.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's got really big sponsors. It's sponsored by what, the Scuderia Ferrari F1 team.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like big sponsors. And, that's crazy is the viewers watching the pay-per-view are the judges. So if the fight isn't finished, they vote on who won the fight.
Really?
Yes, exactly. And in-person tickets to the event are $2,000.
Wow, that's very expensive.
When you come in, I think you get your picture taken with Mikuru and Kai.
Okay, so you immediately get the price of admission off those photos.
You get like champagne and caviar, and you get to like watch it ringside. So it's very much catering to like famous people that want to be seen at this event.
Yeah. And
so
I'm interested, the contestants on this show, they're not looking for fighters, they're looking for personalities. Would you say that's correct?
It's both. It's both, right? It's people with combat backgrounds and like YouTubers, pro wrestlers, comedians, everything. And Mikuru has used his YouTube connections. So those videos you're talking about, those are actually the auditions to become one of the fighters on this event. And so people come and then they like appeal to Mikuru and his friends why they should be allowed to fight on this event. And so it's like this whole audition. It's like an American Idol, but the winners all get to fight at this pay-per-view event. And each one of them is getting close. Each one of those auditions got close to like 5 million views.
Yeah, huge numbers.
The most recent one it's only been up for a day and it's got like 5 million views. And so if you remember when Shibatar in his Rising fights, he was always surrounded by like really famous Japanese YouTubers.
Right.
All those people, I mean, they come on, they talk shit to the contestants, Mikuru and Kai do, and you have people that come on and they just have like, it's like essentially like you have like a minute, tell Mikuru why you're interesting and why you should be allowed to fight on the show. and then they ask them who they want to fight. One of the guys on the show is fighting Mikuru's manager. Like, if you want to fight like one of Mikuru's friends, yeah, you can do that. So it's just gonna be this crazy event. And there's a guy with tattoos all over his face. There's a pro wrestling girl. I mean, it's gonna be a crazy event. The fight, the technique is usually awful, but
that's not why people are watching.
No, they're not watching it. This is very much like a mixture between the outsider and like celebrity boxing.
And who do you think, like, demographic wise, is watching this? Is this like MMA fans, or do you think this is just like people who want to watch YouTubers, or who just want to watch whatever, you know, dumb shits on YouTube?
Oh, it's not MMA fans. I mean, I'm sure they're included, but the numbers are too big,
right,
for just MMA fans. Mikuru has become such like a cult of personality. He's become a very popular YouTuber, and when he gets these other YouTubers involved, like his brother himself, or like some of these girls that are also popular YouTubers, it's just the young people, the people that like to watch YouTube. And the way that the auditions are like 20-minute long videos, I believe, and with each fight being a minute, I think it's like just perfect for short attention span. People in Japan ride trains all the time, so while you're riding the train to work, you can watch an entire event.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, me personally, I find a lot of like Mikuru's content to seem a little like mean-spirited. Like,
Yeah.
like, clearly a lot of this stuff just seems to be like making fun of a lot of the contestants. And there was something he did last year that sort of struck a nerve with me. It was like some Abima pay-per-view where he was like fighting 4 people in one night, and he just like
he hurt one of the guys, didn't he?
I don't know about that, but I mean, he brutally beat all these people because they were just so much less skilled than him, right?
Well, I would agree with you that he's much more meaner in tone than his brother. Kai seems much friendlier, at least in the YouTube content that he creates, where Mikuru definitely seems like, I'm a badass.
Well,
this badass philosopher who should be feared.
I feel like it just goes back to like the general concepts that they first broke out with, where Mikuru was trying to be this badass, like you said, and Kai's thing when he started was like, oh, I'm this like nerd playing undercover, and I'm like actually a fighter, but I look really nerdy on the outside. It was like a much softer sort of way to market himself.
No, I think personality-wise, they appear quite different, and I think this reflects their different personalities. Because I mean, what Kai is like dressing up like a nerd with Panchan dressing like a maid and walking around Akihabara, where Mikuru is learning how to street fight with a guy with a baseball bat. Like, it's very different style videos. And
he has a very distinct look that I don't think he very much like strays from, where it's those sunglasses and the black coat and everything. And he's got a whole gimmick going.
On the Outsiders, it's like half people in there are wearing sunglasses. It's like Mikuru's is like impacting fashion. People wearing sunglasses indoors.
Yeah, and one of the things I find funny about Breaking Down, and I mentioned before we started recording that it's similar to the LDH Dreamer show, but one thing I find funny about it is it doesn't really seem to be too much like structured. Like, similar to the Dreamer show, it just seems like they just sort of go, okay, yeah, we can do that, and then just sort of start going with something once it's suggested. Like that Dreamer show that happened before, one thing I thought was funny about it was like there was no real formal way that people got eliminated. It would just sort of be like, okay, we're going to eliminate people now.
Well, I'd say the difference is the Dreamer show is at least attempting to create a new generation of MMA fighters.
Yeah, it was much more, it took itself seriously, and it wasn't there to like sort of not exploit, but like make fun of the fighters.
Where Breaking Down is exploitative, like in the same way that American Idol is.
Right.
Where these people come out and they're just trying to do whatever it takes to get Mikuru's attention. And he's usually like very dismissive, like very Simon Cowell-esque of them.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, but if they get his attention, then he like laugh. If you can make him laugh, essentially, you get on the show. So that's what people try to do, but it's very hard to make him laugh.
Are you personally going to be watching the show that's today?
I don't think so, but my wife is very interested in it. She's talking about ordering it.
It's not cheap.
It's like $28.
Oh, that's getting up there.
Yeah. Good money for him. It's kind of funny because it's being aired on the Abima site and his own website, but you get all these perks if you get it on his own website. I think Mikuru is really testing the market of doing his own pay-per-views.
if there's one thing he knows, and I'll have to give him credit for this, it's business. You know, he's so clearly just business oriented right now in how he markets himself and how he does everything.
There's no way to take this as but kind of insulting, but based off of his skill level, he has out earned like his like MMA skill level.
Oh,
He has
absolutely.
launched himself to a level where he's making so much money.
Well, the funny thing to
And when
me
you're
is
having events sponsored by the Ferrari F1 race team,
the
and you're
funny thing
driving a Ferrari around on YouTube. Yeah.
the funny thing to me is that Kai Asakura, out of both of them, has clearly been the fighter who has gone farther success-wise in the ring. But out of both of them, Mikuru is probably the one who's making way more money. Like, and it's probably not even close between them because Kai's successful on YouTube too, but Mikuru, he just seems like he's on a different level.
Yeah, it seems like Kai has always focused more on his MMA career, where Mikuru always focused more on the YouTube. And I mean, Mikuru has to be making a fortune. And they show, like, just based off his lifestyle, I don't know if he's probably spending all of his money, but even if he's spending all of his money, he's making a fortune.
Right. And I think that one thing that's interesting is that, you know, you have this one guy that's invested more in being a fighter, and you have this one guy who's invested more in being an entertainer. And you're seeing the entertainer one pay off more. I mean, even in the ring, which one of them is getting the Floyd Mayweather exhibition coming up?
Exactly. Well, I mean, if that fight even happens, but yeah, I'll believe it when Mayweather lands. But yeah, so I think Mikuru, back to what you're saying, he's very business savvy. Your athletic prime is so short. I think he realized that by going the entertainment route, he could be around for decades and continue making money.
He started his YouTube thing as like, I'm the fighter, but the way he's shifting his content is very much so that he doesn't have to be the fighter. He just has to be associated with fighting.
Yes, and now he just watches people fight.
Exactly.
And it's been crazy views. Yeah.
One more thing I want to talk about before we get out of here. Tofiq Musayev has been under contract with Bellator basically this entire year, but his debut is yet to come. And it's just been a circumstantial thing that a few fights have fallen through. But he's in a really great opportunity. And I think it's this upcoming weekend. He's going to be facing Sydney Outlaw. And how this fight came about was Sydney Outlaw was actually supposed to fight Patricky Pitbull for the Bellator Lightweight Championship. And then Patricky pulled out of that fight due to injury, I think it was. And they said, okay, Tofiq, you're already on this card. Let's just give you Sydney Outlaw. And, you know, if you do the hashtag MMA math here and figure it out, you know, a win here for Tofiq in his Bellator debut could set him up for a title fight. What do you think about just the positioning here for him in Bellator?
It's a brilliant opportunity for him that I think has no downside. I mean, when you accept these changes last minute, it's only upside for him. So, I mean, if he wins this, he's all of a sudden very close to being able to challenge for the Bellator title. And he's had some problems because he hasn't been able to compete, I imagine, as much as he would like to. But I was looking at it. I mean, Sydney Outlaw also hasn't been the most active guy recently.
Right.
They're actually very similar in because going back to RIZIN, I thought the Souza fight with Tofiq, I don't know if it would have been different, but there was the whole military thing he was involved in. He hadn't fought in a while, hadn't been able to train. There's the quarantine. So I thought they had a lot of handicaps going into that fight. But going into this fight, they both have been about as active as the other. They've both faced pretty good talent. So I think it's a great opportunity for him to kind of skip the line and get ready for a title shot if he wins.
And it's a really interesting opportunity because we were talking earlier about how, you know, RIZIN alum are making so many achievements on the international scale. And, you know, a win for Tofiq here could put another fighter in that upper echelon of former RIZIN fighters turned champions in other promotions. And that would be another big moment for the promotion. I mean, the more you see these guys become champions in other promotions, obviously it's big for the fighter, but people do that callback of saying, well, hey, this is where they were first. This is probably a promotion you should be watching if they were there first.
But one thing that also makes RIZIN kind of unique is that once fighters move on, the promotion still supports them. And so, like, when Edie fights or Manel Cape fights or Kana Watanabe, I mean, the RIZIN social media accounts tweet about it. They're very proud of their alumni. They like to associate themselves with them. and you don't really see a lot of other promotions doing that. So Tofiq still has a lot of Japanese fans because they're happy. They want to see him do well. They all loved it when he was like Azerbaijan, when he said that. And so he's a very popular fighter over here, and a lot of Japanese fighters will watch him fight in Bellator. And I think he'll always have some connection to Japan throughout the rest of his career.
Yeah, and I think that part of why people like him is because he had that really great Grand Prix run, and that was really, if you consider everything about his RIZIN run, which in the big picture was quite short, that was like the big crowning moment that made him, solidified him as a RIZIN fighter as opposed to someone who just had a few stops in the promotion.
I also can't fault anybody that gets submitted by Souza because that guy's a wizard.
So. Yeah, and I totally do agree that the circumstances around that fight made it very hard for Tofiq. Even if you were just to factor in the quarantine and stuff like that, I think that alone already gives you such a setback. But anyway, that's really good. That's going to be interesting. That's coming up this weekend, and we'll see how that goes. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. CJ, before we go, if you want to plug anything, go right ahead.
Just check out the podcast of Shu. Let's talk JMMA, and I'll be releasing some articles. The Pancrase 328s tomorrow, so I'll have some results on that. So check it out.
Yeah, and I've said it before in JMMA Monday articles, but the stuff you publish at sogo-kaku.com, it really is great because nobody else or hardly anybody else is doing English content which is on the scene or talking straight to the source, and we need that. So everybody needs to check out that site, and it's a great resource.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, that's the end. So thank you everyone for listening, and make sure to keep checking the content at knockdownnews.com, and hopefully we'll have another JMMA Monday audio podcast for you soon.